two things very quickly. I only take 30 seconds. First of all, why under the Trumpy Trump umbrella there is so much, how should we use the word, anger, annoyance towards Social Security? It's like bashed over the head, left, right and centre. If you can just explain to me the history, because I'm clearly an outsider looking in and I'm confused. The other thing, still on the subject of money, we'd love to buy our team here a coffee. We really would, so we can bring you more clips. If you get a second, please press the thanks button. And right, Social Security. Rand Paul's always annoyed about it, by the way.
Disaster, and we have to talk about all the spending, including the entitlements, or we're going to ruin the country and ruin our currency.
Because you're all people that have a lot of money. I know 20 of you, and you're rich as hell. We're going to give you tax cuts. We're going to pay off our debt.
You know, that's everything you need to know about Donald Trump. When he thinks the cameras aren't on, he tells his rich friends, quote, we're going to give you tax cuts.
Can anybody in America imagine that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, billionaires are doing phenomenally well, that he's going to give them huge tax breaks? And then at the same time, he's going to cut Social Security and Medicare and programs that our kids need.
This is his economic plan? That's what he wants to do? Cutting taxes for his friends? Cutting Social Security for you? That makes me mad as hell, quite frankly.
The hypocrisy is just outrageous. This is what he says to his billionaire friends, not quite what he's saying at his rallies.
There are 1,000 billionaires in America, in this country. They pay an average tax rate of 8.2% federal taxes. So I have a plan, we have a plan, asking his good buddies to begin to pay their fair share.
You have one candidate who wants to cut Medicare and Social Security and one who's going to protect it. That's why I'm supporting Joe, and I hope you will as well.
Thanks, pal.
The truth of the matter is, we have to wake up and say our entitlements are unsound. Nobody wants to hear that, and people say you can't be elected by saying that. Well, guess what? It's the truth, and if we do not speak the truth to our problems, we will eventually and ultimately encounter a crisis in our country, and I'm for averting that crisis. The entitlement system is broken. I didn't break it. I'm not responsible for the baby boom. We have all these people that were born after the war and they're retiring. It just is happening. We have fewer workers. How do you fix Social Security? It's very simple. Everybody knows it, but everybody wants to be quiet. No one wants to say it. I will say it. The age of Social Security will have to gradually rise. I've said it. I've said it repeatedly. I don't want it necessarily. I don't want to have to do the things we have to do, but someone has to stand up and say that it has to be done. And you can do it gradually. You can raise the age or allow the age to rise slowly for those 55 and under. Next week, I and a couple of other senators will present a fix for Social Security that fixes Social Security in perpetuity. That's a long time, forever. We will fix Social Security by allowing the age to rise gradually on younger people and by saying to those who will retire, the younger people again, that you may not get as much out of it as some other people get. Basically, there will have to be some testing that says that when you're in a higher income bracket, that your Social Security payments will not rise as rapidly as some others will.
That will begin with the questioning. You know, at hearings like this, experts throw out a lot of numbers, and I look at the world a little bit differently than some of our conservative economists in terms of what's happening to working families. But at the end of the day, you got millions and millions of people who have worked their whole lives, are entering retirement, and they're scared to death. And I think, Ms. Chambers, your testimony was extremely moving, because I think you're not just speaking about your own life, not even about the UAW and union members. You're talking about millions and millions of people. Talk a little bit, not only for your own experience, from your friends, your family, what it's like to have worked, in your case, 17 years for one of the major corporations in America, and as I understand it right now, you have no retirement program, no pension program. On an emotional basis, on a personal basis, what is that like?
So, yeah, we have a 401k, and we got a raise in our 401k, and it's great. It's a good stepping stone. It's a good foot forward. But when I retire, my 401k is based off, and the rest of America now that's in my generation, is based off of what the stock market's doing. I've seen several times in my lifetime where the stock markets went down and we've lost a lot of money in our 401k. I'm not at retirement age, but when I look at my 401k and the amount of money that was bleeding out of it with the COVID, it makes me very uneasy. It kind of feels like, especially working at Ford. I had a goal post when I first hired in, and then it was, well, you're a temporary employee full-time until further notice. So then now I'm...
Explain to members what being a quote-unquote temporary, you were a temporary employee for 6 years, right?
Yep.
It's a long temp. What does that mean?
So I was considered full-time, so I worked 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but I was locked in at $14 an hour until 2013. And I was expected to do everything a full-time employee did, but I didn't get any of the benefits. And that actually, when I hired in, I questioned what parts of the contract I fell under, and they said, it depends on what we're talking about. So there was never any full, like, here's your book, this is your rules and regulations. It's like, no, we're not going to cover you under that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Ghilarducci, we are, in one sense, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, right? Yeah. A lot of billionaires out there doing very, very well. How does, in your judgment, the American retirement plan, the status of older Americans compared to people around other wealthy nations?
Yeah.
Microphone.
My data really looks at that question. So I compare what people were like when they were approaching retirement 30 years ago, and then take the same snapshot of the generation that looks like them right now. And as I said in my written testimony today, 50% will not be able to meet their retirement standards, and most of them won't be able to meet poverty standard. Compare that to other countries with all different kinds of systems, the Scandinavians, the Germans, the French, even the Italians. Just look at our peers, and we fall way behind. I was looking at the elderly poverty rates. Kazakhstan does better than us. So there's a couple of design issues.
I heard from some of the economists here today that we're doing just great. Things are getting better. Is that
true? So that was my little lesson on averages versus medians. Because the rich have done so well, they have brought up those averages that people who talk about average retirement wealth can point to. It's gone up. But that's because the top 10% got the benefit of retirement tax cuts. They got the benefit of the run-up in the market. They didn't take money out, to buy their houses.
Okay, last question. Thank you very much. Sorry. Mr. Doonan, right now, billionaire pays Social Security taxes on $168,000. That's about it. Massive amounts of untaxed money there despite massive income and wealth inequality. That makes sense to you?
Thank you for the question.
Microphone.
Thank you for the question. I would note that one of the reasons Social Security's financing fell off track is we used to capture 90% of total income, and that was sort of expected to continue. But with rising inequality, I think we're down to about 82 or 81. When these projections were done in the early 80s, I feel like they did a pretty nice job. We had 40 years of level costs, but there are some areas where the projections just didn't come true.
Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. We next have Senator Scott, followed by Senator Lujan.
Yeah. First, I want to thank the chairman for holding this, and I agree with Senator Van Hollen. I think we all, and it's similar to what Senator Johnson said, I think we all ought to maybe get around the table and come up with all the different ideas. And probably I think something Senator Johnson was saying, let's all get all the facts in front of us first, because there's a lot of misconceptions about Social Security and how it started and what, the ways to fix it. So we've got a lot of Social Security and Medicare recipients in my state, Florida. So I proposed legislation that's called the Protect Our Seniors Act that would safeguard the benefits of these critical entitlements. It does three important things. First, we send the funding of 87,000 more IRS agents and put that money in Social Security and Medicare. Second would say any savings with, if there's a way to come up with savings in Medicare, and there clearly is, we keep those in Medicare. Last fall, there was legislation that was passed that cut the spending in Medicare, but unfortunately that money was taken outside of the Medicare program, and so instead keeping it in. Finally, would it establish a rule to prevent cuts to Medicare and Social Security unless you had 2/3 of Congress willing to do that? So, because I think we all have to figure out, I think all of us have said we've got to figure this out. So we've had since 2019 about a 1.8% increase in our population. There's why I go, how much in dollar numbers, how much is to go back to the 2019 budget, Biden's proposed budget this year, how much is that? How much increase would that be in the total spending?
Total spending from 2019. I don't have 2019 in front of me. It's gone up, spending as a share of the economy and in dollars.
It's about I think it's about $2 trillion. Okay. Wouldn't that be close?
It's in the trillions. That's right.
Yeah. So, Mr. Goss, how much would it cost this year to fully fund where there was no deficit in Social Security? However you do it, how much dollars are we talking about just in this fiscal year?
Yeah, this year the cash deficit was I had it before me, $145 billion is what we have this year.
So we've had a $2 trillion increase in our budget, okay? And to fix Social Security, we could have taken some of that money from other programs and put $145 billion, and that would have fully funded Social Security.
That's the primary deficit this year. So that's in some sense what we're
just
drawing
for one year,
trust
just
fund.
for 1 year.
That would be just for 1 year what we're drawing from the trust fund.
Right.
That's in some sense the cash gap.
Right. And I think everybody would agree that this is a pretty big issue for every American thinks about this, whether, maybe my grandkids don't think about it much, but I think anybody's thinking about their retirement. So what do you all think of Joe Biden's proposal right now? What do you think of his proposal to fix Social Security? What do each of you think about it?
During the presidential campaign,
No, the one like in his budget, the one he would have this right now in his budget.
I don't believe there is anything.
I said we analyze the president's budget every year, and we did not analyze any Social Security proposals.
So he has no proposal to fix Social Security, one of the biggest issues. He's the sitting president of the United States. Number two, that's the first question. So in the budget, when they came and talked about the budget, what was the response when anybody asked about what they were doing to fix Social Security? Did they say what they were doing when they came and talked about it, when OMB came and talked to this budget committee? So
I don't know. That's beyond the role of CBO.
Right.
But
so we've said here we've increased our budget by $2 trillion in 5 years. All right. Right now we could fix Social Security with some of that money. We would take $145 billion out of $2 trillion, and there's not one thing that Joe Biden has done to fix it.
Yeah, and just to make sure that the 145 is the 1 year cash balance. There's lots of other measures
But the budget's up $2
solvency.
trillion, right?
Yeah, no, and we of course we would analyze any proposals. So.
Right. So, I think that what's frustrating here is we know this is one of the biggest issues we have. We've seen an unbelievable increase in our spending and been nothing by this president to do anything to solve it. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to go back to what Senator Johnson brought up. Let's all sit down and talk about this in our entire budget. If the biggest issue we've got is retirement benefits, which I think most Americans would say it's one of the top 3 issues they're dealing with. It's inflation, it's retirement benefits, and medical bills. And this committee, I think we have every opportunity to solve it. So I hope we'll take that opportunity. But I want to thank each of you for being here.
Senator.
Real. And you're a good man. You're consistent. Every time there's a problem, tax the rich. Count me in for more revenue. We're going to need more revenue. But if you think taxing the wealthy is going to save Social Security, you're wrong. So where are we with Social Security? By 2034, according to the recent trust fund report, the money in Social Security will require us to reduce benefits so that you can get only 77% of the benefits you owed because we're paying out more than we're taking in. That's a fact. It slipped a year. but we're on a glide path where over time, Senator Romney knows this, the money being paid in and the money taken out doesn't add up. And if you don't do something now, you're going to have a draconian choice of cutting benefits and raising taxes to keep the thing afloat. But here's the good news. We got some time if we act together. And here's the model I would suggest, the Reagan-O'Neill model. And I think it's in the 80s, Greenspan Commission was formed by President Reagan. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan were known to have a drink together. And apparently during one of those discussions, they said, well, let's do something about Social Security because it's going broke. So they got Alan Greenspan and a bunch of folks to come up with some ideas. They did a little more on the revenue side, but they adjusted the age of retirement over time from 65 to 67. I just got my first Social Security check a few months ago. I was eligible 66, I think, in 2 months. In my case, when I was 21 and 22, my mom and dad died within about 15 months of each other. I had a 13-year-old sister. We moved in with an aunt and uncle who worked in textile plants in South Carolina. Probably never made over $30,000 in her life. The survivor benefit portion of Social Security for my sister until she got 18 really helped us get by. Now I am 66, soon will be 67. I have a good salary. I have a military retirement. I have a congressional pension plan. If you ask me to take a little less to save Social Security for people who need it more than I do, count me in. And it's going to take that kind of commitment from all of us. The wealthier people are going to have to take a little less in benefits. Younger people are living longer, so we're going to have to adjust the age probably once again. But here's the fact. In 1955, when I was born, there were 8.6 workers for every retiree. In 1990, there was 3.4. In 2022, there's 2.8. By 2050, there's 2.2. Senator Romney's done everything he can personally to save Social Security. If you ever go to a Romney family reunion, you'll see a lot of people going to pay into Social Security. I have let you down. I'm not married with no kids. It's people like me screwing this thing up. So the bottom line here is that we have fewer people working for the number of people retired, and if that doesn't create a problem, then I think you're missing the point. 2.2 people by the middle of the century are not going to generate the amount of money necessary to keep the fund solvent if we don't make some changes. So what are the changes that Simpson, Bowles, the Gang of Six, kind of bipartisan people have looked at? Adjusting the age of retirement, increasing revenue, and trying to make the benefit structure more efficient. So I don't need a lecture about Social Security. I understand the value of the program because when I was 22, lost both parents, had a 13-year-old sister to take care of, the money really mattered. It matters to a lot of people on retirement. It's their primary source of income. I'm at a stage now where I could wouldn't change my lifestyle to have a smaller COLA for me, maybe none at all, but smaller for sure, and to restructure the benefit schedule so the money will be there for people who need it more than I do. I don't know how to solve this problem without all of us working together. I know that what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did in the 1980s worked for a while. We got to do that again. They didn't go to the approach of Senator Sanders of just taxing the wealthy because it's not going to work as a standalone proposition. So the country is in a world of hurt. Our financial house is not in order. By 2031, we'll have $2 trillion in annual deficits. The national debt by 2032 will be $40 trillion. By 2052, debt to GDP will be 185%. That's a separate problem from Social Security, but Social Security is sort of consumed in that. Now, the trustee report assumes something about the viability of the trust fund, Mr. Chairman. They assumed about a 3.5% inflation rate. Well, we know now that that's not exactly what's going on. Interest rates are going up. Inflation rates are at 8%. Every increase in interest rates is about $200 billion debt service. So we're on a trajectory now. There we go. We're on a trajectory where inflation is higher than anticipated, which puts stress on the trust fund. Interest rates are going up, which will put stress on the economy. So what I propose we do is have this discussion. You can blame us if you would like, but you're not going to be able to blame me for not caring, because I do. And I will challenge your assumptions about how to save the system, understanding you're a patriotic American and you want to do what you think is best. But in your world, we're all the bad guys and you figured this out. You haven't figured it out. What you're selling doesn't work. And we'll have a good discussion about what will work. It will be bipartisanship. It won't be the Sanders plan. It won't be individual private accounts. That might be part of the mix, who knows. The bottom line is we're going to have to make some hard decisions. I stand ready to make those hard decisions. Senator Romney has been terrific. Senator Romney wants somebody outside of politics to give us some information, like we had with Simpson Bowles, like we had with the Gang of Six, to adjust Social Security and stop it from running out of money by 2034 and having to reduce benefits. And I think he and others on our side, and people on your side, quite frankly, are willing to do this. And I would invite President Biden to be part of it. I would love to be able to sit down with the administration and see if we can recreate the momentum for Simpson Bowles or the Gang of Six, where we put on the table something of everything, where everybody has to give a little bit to save a system worth saving. So if this is an election year issue, great. I think it needs to be talked about, and we're going to talk about it in terms on our side that is a little more holistic than just tax the rich. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Caprita, I mentioned in my opening comments, and I think the chairman agrees, that this has to be done in a bipartisan fashion and with a whole range of options on the table. Too often Democrats claim that Republicans want to cut Medicare every time we put or mention the troubles facing the program. So, Mr. Caprita, Democrats have a record of proposing and enacting Medicare cuts. I've already mentioned some in my statement. I'd like to have you elaborate if you agree with my statement.
Well, both parties, I would say, have sometimes put Medicare changes on the table. They have reduced spending. You can call them cuts, of course. And, you know, in the Affordable Care Act, there was a very substantial change in, particularly for inpatient hospital services, something called a productivity adjustment factor, which is still in place and permanent and has a very large cumulative effect on spending. So I think many people view it as a good thing because it's brought down hospital spending quite a bit. The question is it sustainable over the long run? We're relying very heavily on it to keep the numbers down, but the actuaries are always warning that it might be overdone.
Under Medicare for All, Mr. Caprita, what happens to provider reimbursement rates, and how would that affect care, particularly in rural America?
Well, Medicare for All, I think, needs to be viewed through a political economy lens. How does it get managed over time? You know, and it's very easy to, when you're facing a budget crunch, just to pay people less. And of course, when you pay providers less, eventually there's supply changes. That means fewer providers actually provide the services at the lower rates. That's how you end up with queuing problems. So I do think that our multi-payer system, much as we dislike many aspects of it, keeps open revenue streams that makes it so that providers are not dependent on any one player to make sure they can serve patients. And so I think we shouldn't move away from that.
We always hear this business about raising taxes on the rich. During President Obama's tenure, rich was arbitrarily defined at $200,000. So as part of Obamacare, Democrats enacted 3 8/10% net investment tax at these thresholds, but didn't index them, knowing it would eventually hit middle-income taxpayers. Since this enactment, the number of taxpayers hit by this money grab have more than doubled, from 3 million to 7 million. Now they're proposing to quadruple the tax and claim it'll only apply to 2% of the taxpayers. So you can understand why I'm skeptical about that statement. Mr. Caprita, much like 3 8/10% tax enacted on Obamacare, wouldn't the number of taxpayers affected by this supercharged tax increase over time, capturing more than 2% of the taxpayers?
If you don't index the income threshold upon which a tax is applied, over time, the the real value of those thresholds, of course, erode due to inflation. So we've had bracket creep in the past in our tax system, and sometimes it's sustainable and sometimes not, depending on what's going on. There usually is eventually some pushback on it.
Yeah. President Biden's Medicare proposal and President Obama's Affordable Care Act both doubled counted Medicare revenue. So, Mr. Capretta, these are obviously underhanded gimmicks in the budget. How does this impact federal deficits and debt?
Well, I do think this is an underreported phenomenon, which is when you include on the PAYGO scorecard Medicare savings and HI in particular, you can end up double counting it. It can make the solvency of Medicare improve, which allows higher payments for Medicare down the road, and it also could be used to finance another bill, through the PAYGO scorecard. So I think what we should try to avoid when we're working on Medicare solvency is taking credit for it on both sides of the budget. Especially, a lot of times it's not big enough to make a real big difference, but Medicare's big. And so when you put a lot more money into Medicare and then also claim you can spend it under PAYGO for something else, that's when you end up with a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Padilla, followed by Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lindsey Graham has a scheduling conflict and will be making his opening statement after our witnesses testify. Is that right? Yep. Okay. Social Security is, I think, as everybody knows, one of the most popular and successful government programs in the history of our nation. For more than 80 years, in good times and bad, Social Security has paid out every benefit owed to every eligible American on time and without delay. And I think it's important to make that point. We live in a moment of great insecurity, and yet Social Security, since its inception, has never failed the American people and remains a program enormously important to them and one that they can rely upon. Not once over more than 8 decades of operation, not during the pandemic that we're in, not during the Wall Street crash, has anyone ever received a letter or a phone call from the Social Security Administration saying, sorry, the economy is not doing well, we need to cut your benefits. Never happened. And if I have anything to say about it, it never will happen. Today, while many people take Social Security for granted, it's been around for a long time, let us remember, before Social Security was created in 1935, about half of our nation's seniors were living in poverty. Today, though the poverty rate is still too high for seniors, that rate is just 8.9%. 50% before Social Security, less than 9% today. Got to do better, but that is a significant improvement. Without Social Security, it is estimated that some 22 million Americans, including more than 16 million seniors, would be living in poverty. Yet, despite this important success, we should be clear that tens of millions of senior citizens are still struggling today to make ends meet, and many older workers are scared to death, literally frightened to death, that they will never be able to retire with any shred of dignity. According to the most recent data that I have seen, 12% of seniors in America are trying to live on an income of less than $10,000 a year. Got that? 12% less than $10,000 a year. I don't know how anyone can live, seniors or otherwise, on less than $10,000. And equally important, 55% of seniors are trying to survive on less than $25,000 a year. Think about that. And when you're a senior, you're dependent on prescription drugs and health care, trying to keep your home warm, trying to make it. On 25,000 years, that's more than half of the seniors in America. adding insult to injury, and this is an enormously important point that I think we don't make often enough. About half of older Americans, those who are 55 years of age and older, have no retirement savings. Got that? You're 55 years of age in America, you've worked your whole life, you got zero in the bank for when you retire. And they are dependent on a Social Security benefit today that is less than $1,540 a month on average. Now, despite what some politicians have been saying for years, Social Security today is not on the line going broke. Social Security has a $2.85 trillion surplus in its trust fund and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 13 years, okay? Social Security, you pay out all your benefits for the next 13 years. But what the actuaries want, what I want, what I think most people want is more than 13 years. The actuaries talk about 75 years being the kind of number that we should have as we go forward. After that 13 years, Social Security estimates that there will be enough funding, Social Security Administration estimates that there will be enough funding available to pay 80% of promised benefits. So you got all benefits for the next 13 years, 80% after that. Now, given that reality, our job, in my view, is not to cut Social Security, is not to raise the retirement age, as many of my Republican colleagues would have us do. Our job is to expand Social Security so that everyone in America can retire with the dignity that he or she deserves, and that every person in this country with a disability can retire with the security they need. And that is what the Social Security Expansion Act that I have introduced today, along with Senators Warren, Whitehouse, Merkley, Van Hollen, Padilla, Booker, and Gillibrand, is all about. This legislation has been endorsed by many, many organizations, including the AFL-CIO, the Alliance for Retired Americans, Social Security Works, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the American Federation of Teachers, and many, many other organizations. According to a letter, this is an important part of what this hearing is about today, according to a letter that I received from the Social Security Administration this morning, this legislation will fully fund Social Security for the next 75 years and expand benefits for senior citizens and people with disabilities. Now, how do we do that? How do you expand benefits and make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, which is, I think, what the American people want? Well, the answer is not complicated. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, at a time when billionaires pay an effective tax rate lower than the average working person, at a time when the very richest people in this country are becoming much richer, this legislation demands that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. Today, absurdly and grossly unfairly, there is a cap on income subject to Social Security taxes. That cap is now about $147,000 a year. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you are a multi-billionaire, you pay the same amount of money into Social Security as someone who makes $147,000 a year. Got that? It means that if you make $147,000 a year, you pay 6.2% of your income in Social Security taxes. But if you make 10 times more than that, $1,470,000, you pay 0.6% of your income in Social Security taxes. All of this is taking place at a time of massive income and wealth inequality. Now, that may make sense to somebody. It does not make sense to me. Our legislation applies the Social Security payroll tax on all income, including capital gains and dividends, for those who make over $250,000 a year. Under this legislation, 93.6% of households would not see their taxes go up by 1 penny. So the overwhelming majority of the American people would not see any increase in their taxes under this proposal. The tax increase in our legislation only applies to the wealthiest 6.4% of all Americans, those who make $250,000 a year or more. Further and importantly, under this bill, Social Security benefits would be increased by $2,400 a year for both new and existing recipients, lifting millions of seniors out of poverty. In addition, under this bill, we would increase COLAs for senior citizens by more accurately measuring the spending pattern for senior citizens through the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. Now, one of the reasons that I called this hearing, and I'm glad that Senator Graham has been able to be here, is that there is, in fact, a strong philosophical difference between many of us in the Democratic caucus and many in the Republican caucus as to the best way forward with regard to Social Security. And that's kind of the discussion we're going to have today. While virtually all members of the Democratic caucus are on record in support of expanding Social Security benefits, the Republicans, by and large, have taken a very different approach. And I'm delighted, and I hope they will show up, that some of the Republicans who have taken strong positions on this issue, I see Senator Romney's here, and I'm glad that is the case. Look forward to hearing from him. That some of the Republicans who have taken strong positions on this issue are on this committee. And I know that they're going to be explaining where they come from, and I look forward to that debate. Earlier this year, Senator Rick Scott, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, released a plan that would sunset Social Security every 5 years, raise taxes on millions of seniors, and jeopardize the guaranteed income of 65 million Americans who depend on Social Security. Just a few months ago, the Republican Study Committee in the House introduced a bill that would raise the Social Security retirement age to 69 years of age over the next 8 years and privatize Social Security by allowing employers to divert payroll tax dollars into less generous private retirement accounts. Last year, Senator Romney, who is here with us, has opposed raising taxes on the wealthy to strengthen Social Security, introduced legislation to form a committee to propose cuts to Social Security behind closed doors. In 2020, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell told a Bloomberg reporter that, quote, he hopes to work with the next Democratic president to trim Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, end quote. In 2011, my colleague Senator Graham introduced legislation to raise the full retirement age to 70 by 2032 and index it to longevity. Further, in 2003, Senator Graham introduced a bill that would have cut Social Security benefits for current wage earners by 27%, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Now, as I think everybody knows, I don't often agree with former President Donald Trump. But this is what he said when he was campaigning for president in 2015, and he was right. He said, quote, every Republican, this is in the Republican primary, every Republican wants to do a big number on Social Security, they want to do it on Medicare, and they want to do it on Medicaid, end quote. Well, let me be clear, we cannot allow that to happen. The vast majority of the American people understand that a moral society does not give tax breaks to billionaires and then cut back on the needs of struggling seniors or people with disabilities. In fact, 72% of Americans support increasing, not cutting, Social Security benefits by asking millionaires and billionaires to pay more into the system. So that is where we are right now. It's a great philosophical difference. I look forward to the debate. Some of us think that the very wealthiest people in this country are doing extraordinarily well, should in fact be asked to pay more into Social Security so we can protect millions of low-income and struggling seniors. Others disagree. And with that, I'm glad that Senator Graham has been able to come. Senator Graham.
Republicans point at Democrats and say, we don't like your programs, let's cut your programs. Democrats look at Republicans and say, no, no, don't cut our programs, cut yours. Everybody's don't cut mine, cut yours. That's why I've taken the approach and continue to take the approach, we should cut everything across the board. In the past, there were always like conservatives who say, let's get rid of public television, let's get rid of Sesame Street and Big Bird, and they'd get so much grief over it. It's like, why do that? You're not balancing the budget over Big Bird. Take 1% of Big Bird's budget. Take 1% of everybody's budget. And what would that bring about? It would bring about more conservation of the dollar. It would bring about more restraint and more reform. I'll end with this. People say, where would you cut? I would say everywhere. But I can give you, on the tip of my hand, ridiculous stuff that should have 100% cut, but is never cut and goes on and on. In the early 1970s, William Proxmire, a conservative Democrat, pointed out that the National Science Foundation was spending $50,000 to study what makes people fall in love. Now, that's a better, I think, topic for Cosmopolitan magazine than it is for a government study. Nowadays, it's gone up. We spent $1 million having young people take selfies of themselves while smiling, and then looking at it later in the day to see if looking at pictures of yourself smiling makes you a happier person. That cost you $1 million. We spent $1.5 million studying the mating call of the Panamanian frog to see if the mating call of the country frogs was different than the city frogs. We spent nearly $1 million studying the Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous when they're on cocaine. I think we could have just polled the audience on that one. This is the kind of ridiculous stuff, but does it get better? I complain about this every year and all the time, and everybody shakes their head and says, no way, why are we doing that? The National Science Foundation, we increased their budget 50% last year. People said, oh, we have to compete with China, so let's give the National Science Foundation more money. We've almost increased our budget by 50%. The people are studying why you go on dates, why you're happy, why the male frogs, what their mating call is. This is the craziness, but it never gets better because we always spend more money. So my amendment would do this. My amendment would reduce the spending in real terms. We'd actually spend less money next year than last year. It'd be a 5% reduction in money, and you'd spend less each year, and over 5 years you'd balance your budget, and then we'd be on course to balance. People say, why not? Who can do this? Half of Europe does it. Sweden balances their budget. Germany balances their budget. Over half of the countries of Europe run an annual balanced budget. Our profligacy in our spending is catching up to us. I say we act now, and I recommend a
This committee is long overdue for a hearing that focuses on the rampant waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. We're faced with a $31 trillion mountain of debt. Rather than an attempt to get spending under control, though, both parties continue to propose new spending with no regard for the exploding debt or controlling the already existing spending. To make matters worse, everyone in Congress knows that the plague of waste has infected just about every federal agency. But rather than take steps to restore fiscal health, Congress buries its head in the sand, doles out more and more taxpayer money every year to the executive branch with no strings attached, crosses its fingers, and hopes the problem will fix itself. For years, I've documented outlandish spending in my annual waste report, which exposes how the federal government is misusing Americans' hard-earned tax dollars. My most recent report uncovered $482 billion in government waste. For example, NIH spent more than $1.1 million to get mice drunk. Apparently, we're not aware of what happens when you drink too much. $2.3 million to inject 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine. Apparently, there's not enough evidence of what happens to humans on cocaine. $3 million to watch hamsters fight on steroids. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the kind of stuff. This has been going on since the 1970s. Many of you will remember, the studies to figure out what makes people happy. This stuff's been going on forever. And yet the agency that funds a lot of this, the National Science Foundation, we've doubled their budget in the last 2 years, and we think, oh, well, they'll be much better with waste and fraud with double the amount of money. It's my opinion that the only way you ever rein in waste and fraud is give these agencies less money, and then they'll be forced to make do on less money. Government watchdogs like the GAO were created to expose and combat waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement in the federal government. Every 2 years, GAO publishes its own report that helps call out government misdeeds. The high-risk report is a compilation of government failures and vulnerabilities. It spotlights agencies and programs prone to waste, fraud, and abuse. One issue prominently featured in GAO's most recent high-risk report is the government-wide problem with improper payments. This has been listed in the past and is listed again this year. For example, in 2022, GAO found that Medicare made $46 billion in improper payments. Medicaid made $81 billion in improper payments, which should really not come as a surprise, given that the Medicaid program suspended enforcement of eligibility reviews during the COVID pandemic. This hasn't been talked about much, but during the pandemic, all the so-called rules for looking at abuse just went out the window, and they said, oh, well, everybody deserves Medicaid, everybody deserves food stamps, and nobody came off any of these programs. We just threw out all of the oversight of these programs. And as a consequence, they're in some of the worst state that they've been in a long time. And if this wasn't bad enough, GAO looks at, the substantial levels of fraud in the Department of Labor's unemployment insurance program and says it's almost impossible to grapple with the problem because it's so big and so opaque. Like my own waste report, GAO also identified Department of Defense as a consistent perpetrator of waste, fraud, and abuse. Since 1995, GAO has identified Department of Defense's financial management as high risk. Unfortunately, not much has changed since then, other than the DoD receiving bigger and bigger checks every year. This is an example of how this is really a bipartisan problem. Republicans wanting unlimited checks for the Defense Department, Democrats wanting unlimited checks for the social welfare. Everything goes up and the oversight becomes less and less efficient or profound. Until the Department of Defense can properly account for the money it spends, though, Congress can never effectively conduct oversight of the department. The DoD has become a behemoth of spending, and no one here ever questions it. How does all this waste happen? A better question might be, how does all this waste continue to happen and get worse all of the time? When I was a kid in the 1970s, William Proxmire, a conservative Democrat, used to give his Golden Fleece Awards for nonsensical government spending. But here we are decades later, still facing the same problems. There was one study that they did in the last 2 years, I think it was over $1 million, to study if you take selfies of yourself smiling and you look at these selfies later on in the day, whether or not you'll be happier. Well, the thing is you think that's going to get better if we give the National Science Foundation more money? So we doubled their budget, and they do more of this craziness. And every year we point it out, and every year it gets worse because no one is willing to call them on it and say, we're going to give you less money next year unless you're better with spending the money. Mr. Chairman, GAO identified numerous instances of waste, fraud, and abuse that Congress can easily address. I appreciate GAO's work, but what really is needed is congressional will to significantly reduce government waste and spending. The American people deserve an accountable government that manages their hard-earned dollars responsibly. Mr. Todaro, thank you for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony and working with you to reduce the waste, fraud, and abuse identified in your report.
Thank you, Ranking Member Paul. It's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. Mr. Dodaro, if our subject matter.
Dr. Burke-Nobley, thank you so much for being with us. Let me begin the questioning by picking up on a point you just made and you put in your written remarks as well. You said, and I quote, and goes without saying that everybody here wishes you the very best in your struggle with breast cancer.
Thank you.
You said, and I quote, every treatment I have received was supported by NIH-funded research, correct?
Correct.
Can you give us some idea, based on your expertise, about how much treatment for breast cancer costs in this country today? Somebody has breast cancer over a period of years, how much is it going to cost?
Chairman Sanders, that is a widely variable result. I truly could not give you an estimate because breast cancer is incredibly complicated and can range anything from, a simple surgery to years and years and years of very extensive
Would
therapy.
I be wrong in saying that for some individuals it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatment?
I believe that is correct.
What do you say, as a physician yourself, to somebody who is undergoing treatment for a drug or treatment that was developed by taxpayer dollars that they can't afford or are going to go deeply in debt to pay for? What does one say to a person to say, thank you for your tax dollars developing the drug, but I'm sorry you can't afford the treatment you need to stay alive. How does one respond to that person?
Yes, Chairman Sanders, I have to tell you that I have sat in clinic next to patients of my own who, for one reason or another, could not afford their treatment. It is a tragedy. I sincerely appreciate you championing the cause of affordable and accessible care for all Americans, and if confirmed, I will work with you to the fullest extent of my abilities to also ensure that that is the case.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. Let me be rather specific. If you are confirmed to be the next NIH director, will you commit to reinstating and expanding the reasonable pricing clause in NIH contracts? In other words, if the federal government puts money into the research and development of a drug, will you insist that the price that that drug is charged in America is not higher than it is charged in other countries around the world, given the fact that we've paid for the research and development?
Chairman Sanders, I can say that I myself believe that the American people deserve a fair return on the investment that Congress has placed within the National Institutes of Health and the research that we do. And I will commit to working to make sure that the benefits of our research are affordable and available to all the American people. I cannot give further specifics at this time about the execution of that plan.
So you're not prepared to tell us that when taxpayers spend billions on a drug, they will not be asked to pay the highest prices in the world for what they paid for?
Chairman Sanders, I am more than prepared to say that I will do whatever I am able to make sure that affordable and accessible care is available for everyone who needs it.
Dr. Astellas and Pfizer are charging Americans with prostate cancer over $165,000 for Xtandi, while the exact same drug can be purchased in Japan for just $20,000. $165,000, $20,000 in Japan. This is a drug that was developed by NIH-funded scientists at UCLA. Do you think the price of Xtandi is reasonable? Should we be paying 8 times more for a drug that taxpayer dollars developed than the people in Japan?
Chairman Sanders, my focus is on making sure that the American people have access and availability and can afford the health care that can save lives, and that is what I will make a commitment to.
Right now, we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. The results are higher insurance premiums, higher hospital costs, and millions of people not able to get the drugs they desperately need. Will you commit to us that you will work to make sure that Americans do not pay higher prices for prescription drugs in this country than people around the world?
Chairman Sanders, it would be a great honor to be able to work with you to make sure that the American people have access to the care that they need to live long and healthy lives.
Okay, my time is up. Senator Cassidy. Dr. Burke-Novely, thank you so much for being with us. Let me begin the questioning by picking up on a point you just made and you put in your written remarks as well. You said, and I quote, and goes without saying that everybody here wishes you the very best in your struggle with breast cancer.
Thank you.
You said, and I quote, every treatment I have received was supported by NIH-funded research, correct?
Correct.
Can you give us some idea, based on your expertise, about how much treatment for breast cancer costs in this country today? Somebody has breast cancer over a period of years, how much is it going to cost?
Chairman Sanders, that is a widely variable result. I truly could not give you an estimate because breast cancer is incredibly complicated and can range anything from, a simple surgery to years and years and years of very extensive
Would
therapy.
I be wrong in saying that for some individuals it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatment?
I believe that is correct.
What do you say, as a physician yourself, to somebody who is undergoing treatment for a drug or treatment that was developed by taxpayer dollars that they can't afford or are going to go deeply in debt to pay for? What does one say to a person to say, thank you for your tax dollars developing the drug, but I'm sorry you can't afford the treatment you need to stay alive? How does one respond to that person?
Yes, Chairman Sanders, I have to tell you that I have sat in clinic next to patients of my own who, for one reason or another, could not afford their treatment. It is a tragedy. I sincerely appreciate you championing the cause of affordable and accessible care for all Americans. And if confirmed, I will work with you to the fullest extent of my abilities to also ensure that that is the case.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. Let me be rather specific. If you are confirmed to be the next NIH director, will you commit to reinstating and expanding the reasonable pricing clause in NIH contracts? In other words, if the federal government puts money into the research and development of a drug, will you insist that the price that that drug is charged in America is not higher than it is charged in other countries around the world, given the fact that we've paid for the research and development?
Chairman Sanders, I can say that I myself believe that the American people deserve a fair return on the investment that Congress has placed within the National Institutes of Health and the research that we do. And I will commit to working to make sure that the benefits of our research are affordable and available to all the American people. I cannot give further specifics at this time about the execution of that plan.
So you're not prepared to tell us that when taxpayers spend billions on a drug, they will not be asked to pay the highest prices in the world for what they paid for?
Chairman Sanders, I am more than prepared to say that I will do whatever I am able to make sure that affordable and accessible care is available for everyone who needs it.
Dr. Astellas and Pfizer are charging Americans with prostate cancer over $165,000 for Xtandi, while the exact same drug can be purchased in Japan for just $20,000. $165,000, $20,000 in Japan. This is a drug that was developed by NIH-funded scientists at UCLA. Do you think the price of Xtandi is reasonable? Should we be paying 8 times more for a drug that taxpayer dollars developed than the people in Japan?
Chairman Sanders, my focus is on making sure that the American people have access and availability and can afford the health care that can save lives, and that is what I will make a commitment to.
Right now, we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. The results are higher insurance premiums, higher hospital costs, and millions of people not able to get the drugs they desperately need. Will you commit to us that you will work to make sure that Americans do not pay higher prices for prescription drugs in this country than people around the world?
Chairman Sanders, it would be a great honor to be able to work with you to make sure that the American people have access to the care that they need to live long and healthy lives.
Okay, my time is up. Senator Cassidy.